Major flashing lights warning, disturbing content warning, and also spoilers for Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. If you haven't played it yet, what are you doing here? Go out and get it, it's awesome. Hey. So for a long time, if you asked me what my favorite horror game was, I wouldn't know what to say. I knew I liked horror games, but I could never really find one that stood out as my favorite. For a while it was FNAF 6, then it was I'm Scared, and then finally I found my favorite one, which is still my favorite to this day. Unless you count Omori, which is my favorite game ever and also technically a horror game, but shh, don't talk about that. The one I was talking about was Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. It's a game where you go through Spooky's mansion and there's jump scares. I know, shocking. Basically the point is to make it through 1,000 rooms. The gimmick is that each room only lasts a couple of seconds and they each have predetermined layouts. Now of course this sounds boring, and according to most people, it kind of is. But there are of course things to spice it up. This is mainly through the use of enemies, or specimens as the game calls them. And today, I want to go through and rank all of these from worst to best. First, some ground rules. First off, I'm only going to be covering the main game specimens. See, not only is there a main game, but there's also the Karamari Hospital, Dollhouse, and the Endless mode, which each come with their own specimens. I was originally going to do all the specimens, but then I realized that, besides the main game, I actually don't have a ton to say about them. I mean, how much content can I get from Baby Head in a Box? This does unfortunately mean that Whiteface from I'm Scared is not in the discussion for this list, but just know he's number 1 in my heart. Also, I will be judging this on a lot of factors like design, gameplay, and area that they first appear in. Just know, a boring specimen can be carried by the area they come from, and a great specimen can be held back by the same thing. Finally, I'm going to be judging these based off the HD version of the game. This is mainly because the specimens are 3D in the HD version, as opposed to 2D in the original version. In my opinion, 99% of the specimens look incredibly stupid as 2D images, so we're just going to ignore it for the most part. I mean, this is what Specimen 3 looks like. What is this supposed to make me feel? Fear? All I feel is pity. Okay, actually, I asked my mom and my brother, and they both said they preferred how the 2D one looked, so I guess I'm just wrong. Regardless, I'm still only gonna look at the 3D ones because screw you, it's my video. Anyway, with all that out the way, let's move on to our number 13 Sly, who I consider to be the worst specimen in the entire game. That honor goes to... As the first real specimen in the game, Gel is... well, it sure is the first real specimen in the game. Unimpressive in just about every aspect. Its design is just whatever. It's based off a Lub Glub from Adventure Time, a show I have little to no connection with, so I find it hard to appreciate the design. Not that it's bad, mind you, just that I find it sort of uninteresting, and there's no personal attachment there to help save it. Its area is also... barely an area. Unlike some later specimens, it's just a single room. You read this note and then it appears from this puddle from the center of the room. I get it, it's the first specimen introduction in the game, you don't want to overwhelm the player, but I think a little more could have been done. Finally, once it starts chasing you, it's also by far the easiest chase to deal with. It's mostly just a straight beeline towards you. Despite how it looks, he doesn't float above pits, meaning he's on an even playing field with you. He can spawn these puddles, which make you slower, but he's so slow that it never really comes into effect. This actually changes in the Endless mode, where multiple specimens can chase you at a time, making these puddles pretty deadly actually. But like I said, this video is about the main game only, and thus, his synchronization with other specimens is not considered. His chase is made even easier once you obtain the axe, since you can just whack him and he'll stop for a bit. While we're here, can I really quickly complain about the axe? Well, it's my video, so the answer is yes. God, the axe had such wasted potential. Hitting some enemies will stun them, which is good as a last resort, I guess, but it's never really worth getting close to them just to slow them down a bit. What if, instead of just stunning the enemies, it also removed how many rooms were in the current chase by a bit? That way, there would be more of a risk-reward aspect to it. This isn't even a crazy idea, I'm literally just describing what was in the original game. Yeah, that used to be a feature, but in the HD renovation, they for some reason got rid of it, making the axe essentially useless. Also, the fact that you can get the bad ending for using a tool the game gives you, not a fan. What was I talking about? Oh right, Specimen 2. Overall, the most boring specimen in the game, bar none. Design is whatever, area is just a single room, and gameplay is really easy. I don't think anyone is really going to complain about this placement. However, I'm kind of known for my hot takes, and this video's gone on long enough without one. So let's move on to one that most people are going to heavily disagree with. That being... Let me explain. Okay, so this specimen is by far the most unique one in the game. It's one of only 2 specimens that can appear in any room, though its conditions for spawning are unique. Instead of just randomly, it'll spawn if you've been AFK for 1 minute and 10 seconds. It'll then instantly kill you. So, what's the problem? Well, this specimen has another appearance. It may or may not be the final boss of the game. Yeah, Spooky's has one boss fight at the very end, and it's this guy. This should boost it up in the ranks, but honestly, the boss fight isn't that great. It's a lot of running around and then hitting things with your axe. It's just not very interesting. The Taker lands down here because I just don't have much to say about it. It has no set chase, I mean its main appearance is as an Easter egg. Its boss fight is just whatever, and its design is... Well, it sure is a red thing. I know this will be one of, if not my most controversial take, and I'm expecting a lot of pushback in the comments, but please remember that this is all just my opinion, and my opinions suck. Now, onto one that I imagine will be much less controversial. In 11th, we have... I'm sure some people were confused earlier when I said Specimen 2 was our first actual specimen. What about Specimen 1? Well, that's because Specimen 1 shouldn't really count as one in my opinion. It's the other specimen that has no set location, instead just randomly appearing in any room. They jump out of the wall and... nope, that's really it. Literally the only time they could vaguely be a threat is if they show up while you're getting chased, since they block your path. Besides that, they're just a joke and not a deadly one. Now, I don't think I really need to explain why these are this low. I mean, they barely even count. However, I think I should explain why they aren't lower. Simply put, I just think they're funny. They really put the jump scare in Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. Despite being very cute, mostly, they're often the specimen that makes me jump the most, because I just don't see it coming. I'd say overall this specimen has the least amount of depth in the entire game. I mean, it's literally just a cardboard cutout, but I gave them bonus points for being funny. While the first two entries on this list, I just have little to no good things to say about them at all. But with our first three specimens off the list, these conclude what I would consider the only D tiers in this game. Yep, no F tiers. I like this game if you couldn't tell. Let's move on to our top 10 with a hot, cold, lukewarm take. This specimen, despite landing itself at 10th, actually does a lot right. Its biggest strength, in my opinion, is the area it first spawns in. It's a colorful fast food restaurant with a play area and a gross bathroom and stuff. I just think it's visually very interesting, and is much more unique than the usual lab we find ourselves in. It's here we also learn the lore of the specimen, another thing they get right. Basically, this guy starts to work at a fast food restaurant, but notices some strange occurrences. The same people seem to be ordering the same thing over and over again. Someone will leave the drive-thru, park their car, and then get right back in line for more. He also has some strange dreams after trying some of the food himself. None of the specimens in this game have super deep lore. Most of them you can describe in a single sentence, so this is about the best we're getting. So far I've enjoyed its area and lore. What's not to love? Well, that happens once it actually starts to chase the player. First off, its design. I'm just not a fan, man. It's probably an intentional design choice, but it looks so low poly and generic? Like, the nickname Food Demon is pretty apt because, yup, that sure is a food demon. I'm gonna be honest, this is the only design in the main game that I actively dislike. Its chase is also our first of many to float above pits and phase through walls. This sounds dangerous, but this is one of the last specimens in the game, and they had already pulled this trick with so many others that I was bored of it. Its other main gimmick is that it can sometimes hide doors from your view. I think I like this. It tests how well you've been paying attention to the different layouts, but this late into the game it doesn't really affect you all that much. Overall, not a bad specimen. None of the specimens in this game are bad, but the others later I have more positive thoughts on, whereas this one I'm very mixed on its gameplay and design, the two most important categories. Speaking of specimens that fail in the most important categories... This is yet another one where I feel like my take will be controversial, possibly even more than my Specimen 9 take. I don't really like Parasite. Starting off with its area... oh god, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. It's one of, if not the scariest area in the game. It's the only time I felt like I was in danger even when I really wasn't, which means it's effective in my book. Additionally, wow, this design. I love it. I think it's super creepy and gross looking. Its flayed human-like legs mixed with its stomach mouth. Chef's kiss. Okay, actually, maybe not. I don't think the word kiss and Specimen 10 belong in the same universe. Well, if you've narrowed it down, that means I must not like its gameplay. Simply put, this is my least favorite specimen to see on rechase. Its gimmick is that if you get too far away from it, then it'll turn into a super fast worm version of itself. A version so fast that even your sprinting can't outrun it. So how do you deal with it? Simple. You stay close to it. Too bad it's the slowest thing ever. Literally every time Specimen 10 appears, you just have to walk along with it, which takes forever. Some people actually like this. They say it's one of the few specimens that changes up the formula of run away, since you have to walk with it. My problem is that, yes, it changes up the typical gameplay, but in my opinion, it changes it for the worse. This is my least favorite specimen in the game gameplay-wise. I just find it incredibly boring. This can also be straight up unfair in some rooms. Since you have to stay close to it, it means that coming across a room where you have to choose between two paths can often get you hit. That's really its only flaw. Design is great, area is great, everything about it is great except the gameplay, which is the most important aspect in my opinion. That's why it finds itself at 9th, because it's more frustrating than fun to deal with. Even gel I have more fun avoiding. What an example of wasted potential. So naturally, it's time to move on to one that had little potential to begin with. That being... As the final specimen of the game, you'd think they'd want to go out with a bang. I'm not going to say they went out with a whimper, more of a pop than anything. This monster, in terms of gameplay, is just about as generic as it gets. I mean, you're on water, there's boxes. I wonder if the monster will chase you whenever you go through the water and you have to make it to the next box to avoid them. You'll never guess what you do. Yeah, this has appeared in just about every game ever, so naturally most of the good ideas you could do with it I've seen before. That doesn't make it bad per se, generic doesn't always mean bad, but it is a bit uninteresting to talk about as a result. Like, what do you want me to say? I like water? I got nothing. Its area is fine, I guess. It's a sort of lab, which, like I said earlier, this game loves doing. We do learn that the specimen has apparently been eating whales, which is cool. Yeah, this specimen can really be summed up as fine, I guess. Its gameplay is fine, I guess. Its area is fine, I guess. Even its design is just a pretty generic siren, which is, you guessed it, fine, I guess. The only reason it's up here is that it's the first specimen I have nothing bad to say about. It's just whatever. And that wraps up our C tier. This tier was filled with specimens that are pretty great in certain areas, but lack where it really counts. And then there's Siren, who's not great in anything, yet placed the highest. This list is a disaster. This is one that I can't really explain why I like them. Its area? It's a generic lab, so much so that its employees are called generic lab assistants. Its design? It's a bug. Its gameplay? One of the simplest enemies to get away from. You can mostly just run away and you'll be fine. Yet for some reason this thing found its way to the top half of the list. Well, first off, its design. I don't care if it's just a bug, I love it. I again can't explain why, I just always get happy when I see this guy. The way he crawls, the multiple segments of his body, I love it. It's funny because in real life I actually have a pretty irrational fear of bugs, but here, I don't know, he's just a silly little guy, I can't help but be charmed. Its gameplay, while not super interesting, I think switches things up just enough for how early it appears in the game. Its main gimmick is that it can ambush you through these holes it makes. Yes, you can mostly just run and be fine, but at least this doesn't make the gameplay more annoying, parasite! And Siren to an extent. And finally, its area. Actually, no, I'm not going to defend this. It's far too generic. I always forget this part of the game because it's just so boring. But area is the least important category, so I'll live. Overall, I just get an unexplainable happiness when I see this guy chase me. Does it deserve to be this high? Honestly, no, probably not. Conceptually, it's way less interesting than something like Parasite, but screw you guys, let me put Bug Boy in top 7, okay? Speaking of screw you guys, despite being in the top half of the list, next we have yet another specimen I think most would place higher. That being... let's see here. Specimen 12. His design sucks. His chase kinda sucks. Why is he up here again? Well, I just lied to you. This isn't Specimen 12. This is simply the host for the real Specimen 12, which is actually... That's right, the area itself is actually the real Specimen 12. This means that I kinda have to judge things a bit differently. Instead of just looking at an enemy, I have to judge this entire part of the game as a whole. Overall, it's pretty solid. You find yourself in this mansion within the mansion of the spooky variety you already find yourself in. Here you have to explore different rooms, get keys, and... oh god. Yep, there are parts of this game where you have to hide from the old man, and they are always super tense. Sure, they slow down the speed of gameplay, but here I'll forgive it since it's so unique. You then head into the basement, and that's when you start to be chased by the old man for real. Side note, when the old man first appears down here, this might actually be the hardest I've ever jumped playing this game. I was not prepared for... This part of the game is a much needed change of pace from the room layouts we've gotten used to. It feels much more gamey than the rest of the game. So why isn't it higher? Well, there's simply not more of it. Since the actual specimen is room 810, it means that after you're done with it, you'll never re-encounter it. Yes, the old man can appear again, but like I said, I don't really like him. Even that's not necessarily a bad thing though. Since it doesn't reappear makes this part of the game feel more unique. Like this is truly a one and done experience. Honestly, I just like the specimens above this one a bit more. And that about wraps up our B tier. Yep, only 2 this time. Funny thing for those of you who haven't been keeping track, the remaining specimens are specimens 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I don't know why the mid-game specimens go so hard, but I'm not complaining. Let's move on to A tier, starting with... Specimen 5 is kind of hard for me to explain because it's another one that I'm not sure why I like so much. Its chase is one of the simplest in the game, since Bab can't float or go through walls, making them on an even playing field with you. Their main gimmick is giving me a seizure. Yeah, they just kind of make the walls and stuff around you all crazy. Not a super insane gimmick, but I think it works. It definitely is distracting, that's for sure. Bab's design is one of the best in the entire game in my opinion, obviously being based on several Silent Hill 2 enemies, but especially Pyramid Head. The long blade they wield, as well as the way they slowly walk towards you, it's pretty menacing. Its area is also pretty great, being more Silent Hill stuff. It's one of the more memorable ones in my opinion. Now this is a Spookies video, and I am a YouTuber talking about the area Specimen 5 spawns in, so I'm now contractually obligated to mention this room. Okay, that's enough of that. The lore here is pretty vague cultish stuff. Apparently this cult sacrificed a little girl or something. I don't know, and to be honest, I don't really care. Lore was never one of Spooky's strong suits. This specimen has some pretty great aspects. The only thing you can really nail it for is that its gameplay isn't stellar, but even then it's not bad. It's clear we're getting to the good specimens now. On to our next one, who most people would have way lower than I have. Ringu made it up here for one simple reason. She is far and away the scariest specimen in the game. Not in an, oh my god, I'm so scared, I'm peeing myself, kind of way. More of an, I am viscerally uncomfortable with the current situation kind of way. I can't really explain why. Maybe it's the way her mouth slowly opens as she gets closer to you. Maybe it's the unnaturally happy chase music, which you're hearing in the background now. Maybe it's just the design itself, I don't know. All I know is this is the one specimen I actively dread seeing reappear. The chase itself, Okay, so the problem here isn't actually with Ringu herself, more so what follows her. Her main gimmick is that she can float above pits and go through walls, which is not unique to her whatsoever. However, I think I'll give her a pass. She's the first specimen to do it, and therefore shouldn't be penalized for what later specimens did. Still not insanely interesting, even if you do ignore the reuse of gimmicks, but it's at least something. Lastly, the area she appears in is an abandoned school, which I despise. Besides like hospitals or something, abandoned schools are the scariest location to go to in any game. They're dark and creepy and I don't like it. This is probably the second scariest location in the game, right behind parasites. It's kinda crazy what a massive step up this specimen is for how early she appears in the game. This is the third, fourth if you count the cardboard cutouts, enemy you encounter, yet it's way scarier and harder to deal with than any that came before it, and it's not even really close. And that wraps up our A tier. Now we move on to S tier, our top 3. The specimens I consider to be near perfect in all areas. Now it's time to move on to the strangest specimen in the game. That specimen is... This one's just weird. So the specimen this time is this red mass that takes up the entire room and slowly approaches you. So slowly that I don't think I ever even got close to dying to them. What is this and why did it land all the way up at 3rd? Well, for that we have to look at the area it spawns in. It's this strangely ethereal place with a white cat that says things like, the mask you wear serves its purpose well, but be careful not to lose yourself in it. And knowing your shadow can greatly help you, but be ready to see what you'd rather not be. What is this place? Yeah, Specimen 7 isn't really one I get. It's unique in so many different ways though that I had to put it up here. For example, it's the only specimen that will never chase you again. Sure, the real Specimen 12 never retraces either since it's the mansion itself, but it at least brings in the old man for later. This one? Once you're done here, it'll never come up again. I also really love the white cat as a character. I think her dialogue is, you know, it's interesting at least, I'll give it that. I'm really struggling here. Finally, there's the chase itself with the wall of flesh thingy. Up around you are signs all over the wall. These don't do anything but can serve to distract you. And that's just the thing. Distracting you is the name of the game. The game is testing your willpower, your willingness to press forward despite the questions you may have. And that's really cool, honestly. Sure, it makes this place not much of a threat. I'd say Specimen 7 is down with gel in terms of easiest enemy to avoid, but I don't care. We have enough enemies that threaten you. It's cool to, every once in a while, have one that tests you. Now that was our number 3 spot. That means that there are 2 specimens left. And I gotta be honest, this was hard. I flipped between who to have in second and who to have in first multiple times during the making of this script. They're both essentially perfect and are basically tied for first in my mind. So how about we do something fun? Instead of revealing who got first right away, I'll put these 2 head to head in the 3 categories I've been using. Gameplay, design, and area. And we'll use that to see who the best is. Let's start by going over their designs. And for what it's worth, I think both of these pull off what they're going for perfectly. Specimen 8 is based off the beast from Over the Garden Wall, as well as creatures like the Wendigo. The stupid smirk it has on its face, as well as the way it opens its cloak to reveal the multiple screaming faces, is just perfectly creepy. Its voice is also great. The merchant is no slouch here either, though. Yes, it's not nearly as creepy or imposing as Dear Lord, but it makes up for it by nailing its style. It's based on old N64 character models, something that becomes even clearer when we talk about his area in a bit. I love the way both of these specimens look, but overall I'd say it's pretty clear that Specimen 8 should win here. It's probably my favorite design in the entire game, and it's probably the scariest behind Ringu. So that's 1-0 for Dear Lord. Let's move on to area, which is even more interesting. Actually, before we do, can we talk about how Specimen 6 after getting hit with the axe is actually the funniest thing I've ever seen? Bro just died. Specimen 8 has an outdoorsy location that acts as your tutorial for the axe. There's a bunch of these deer which, oh Jesus Christ! Yeah, back in Parasite section I said that was the only area I felt I was in danger even when I wasn't. Well, here's the time I was. It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed and die to the deer here. It's also one of the most unique locations, again being the only hint of outside you see after a couple hundred rooms of the same mansion. So, pretty good, right? I'm gonna be honest, the merchant wins here and it's not even close. His area is based off an old Zelda dungeon, which is amazing. It's also here we learn the lore of Specimen 6, something Dear Lord doesn't really have, unless you want to get into the developer's other games, which I'm not going to. It's not super deep stuff, just some notes about how a merchant drowned trying to save its puppets from a river. The Legend of Zelda, Merchants, and Drowning. Where have I heard this one before? Yep, in case you haven't pieced it together yet, the merchant is based off creepypastas, more specifically Ben Drowned, which is incredible. An issue I've kind of always had with this game is that I couldn't really relate to the specimen's origins. Yes, I'm a horror fan, but mostly horror games for babies. This means I haven't played Amnesia, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, any of those. You know what I have done though? Read a shit ton of creepypastas. Fun early channel history. My first 2 video essays, and the only 2 videos ever deleted permanently off my channel, were a series of me ranking every Pokemon creepy on the Pokepasta wiki page. I deleted them because they sucked really bad, but point is, I love myself a good, or bad, creepypasta. This is the origin I have the most personal connection to, and this was very effective to me. That's not even mentioning how cool the Zelda dungeon aesthetic is on its own. While I like Dear Lord's area, I gotta say the baby deer can sometimes be more annoying than fun to avoid. So the score is now 1-1. Let's move on to our final section, the gameplay, to see who will take it all home today. And wow dude, both of these specimens are as close to perfect as it gets. Starting with Dear Lord, it's another specimen that floats and goes through walls and that's it. Why is this guy perfect again? Well, that's because in October of 2021, he got a major update. Now whenever there's a wall between you and the specimen, he will open up a rift and zip right to your location. This zip always takes 1 second, so he can travel massive distances in a very short time. This is probably the best change made to anything ever. It went from the most generic runaway specimen to almost a sequel, or I guess prequel, to Parasite. Now since you can't really have a wall between you and Dear Lord, the prevailing strategy is to have him near you at all times. Unlike Parasite, however, Specimen 8 isn't the slowest thing ever invented, so this is actually fun. The rift also looks very cool, looking similar to the area he brings you to during his game over. Overall, one of the most fun specimens in the game. It's always a joy to see him rechase you. Now, we've covered a lot of horror tropes in this video, but there's one major one that seems to be missing. If you've seen any horror media, you know what's coming. The merchant acts as a weeping angel, meaning you have to stare at him. While playing this game, I always turn towards the door I just entered from whenever I enter a new room, and the merchant is the reason why. If you don't immediately stare at him, he'll hit you. The weeping angel gimmick adds a really cool dynamic to the game. Since you can't take your eyes off him, at least you're having to walk through most rooms backwards. That would be unfair if the room layouts were, say, randomly generated, but they aren't. Since there's only a certain number of layouts, the merchant kinda acts like a test of how well you've been paying attention. Based off what little information you get at the start, you have to turn around, then blindly traverse it, which is genius and a ton of fun. It gets even better in long rooms, since eventually he'll be so far away that you can't see him, meaning you have to keep your camera on where you think he is, even if you're not sure, which is really tense. Another one of the best specimens in the game. In fact, I'd say this and Dear Lord are my top 2 gameplay-wise. So now, the question is, which one do I like more? Well, drumroll please. The winner of the best specimen in the game, in my opinion, is Dear Lord. What a glow up this was, going from one of the most conceptually boring specimens to my absolute favorite one. And all it took was a little bit of gameplay tweaking. As to why the merchant didn't win, it's because he has one major weakness. You know how I said the axe is useless? That goes for everyone except the merchant. He is almost completely invalidated by the axe. He always starts the room by teleporting to you, so you just walk a bit, turn around, and then whack him with the axe, and he's out of commission for the rest of the room. So yeah, just do that and you'll be completely fine, no running away required. And that's why, looking at everything overall, I think Dear Lord just barely edges out the merchant as my favorite specimen in all of Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. Thank you guys for watching. It was a joy to finally get to talk about my thoughts on these specimens. I've been wanting to make a Spooky's video since my Garden of Banban 2 review, and finally getting that chance was magical. I hope you enjoyed, and if you played the game and actually thought Joe was the greatest specimen ever conceived, let me know. Until next time, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.